It's certainly an entertaining one. I've not seen the Dortmund game, but I suspect the only similarity between the two games was the scoreline, because I can't imagine the Dortmund game was as exciting and as entertaining as this game here in Leverkusen tonight. Um, Leverkusen, I think, ultimately can be happy with a point. I think they were the better team in the first half, and despite the fact that Newcastle definitely stepped up a gear in the second half and deservedly turned the game around to lose 2-1, Leverkusen still posed a threat on the counter attack, as they had done all night. And the late equaliser from Grimaldo was really, really well worked, really good dummy first to leave the ball into Mazda, who then finds him with the return pass and finishes in front of the Nordkurve to make it 2-2. Um, Before that, as I said, they had been swimming a little bit, because Newcastle came out after the break so strong. I think Leverkusen struggled to deal with Anthony Gordon in particular. He converted the penalty, set up the Newcastle second goal. He hit the inside of the post twice. So from that perspective, Leverkusen could perhaps consider themselves fortunate to not have fallen further behind. But like I said, given that I think they were the better team in the first half, they posed a continued threat on the break in the second half. I think overall, a deserved point.
What is your thoughts,
Yeah,
Stefan?
I broadly agree with Matt. I thought Newcastle had a real kind of bad 20 minutes in the first half where it felt like Leverkusen really kind of pulling away from them. Newcastle have been such a kind of Jekyll and Hyde side this season in terms of performances and big games against big opposition, and you know we've given Leverkusen a lot of praise in recent weeks, but we're still not entirely sure the full extent of that team. I think we also have to mention that Kasper Hjulmand last minute pulled out of this game for personal reasons. That's all we've been given in terms of the information there. Hopefully, it's nothing too serious, but I mean, you could probably argue all day long about the importance of a head coach on the sidelines, but I think it's not nothing that he wasn't there, and it was the assistant kind of barking orders instead of him, because he is typically, I mean, he's not Jurgen Klopp, but he is a notable figure on the sidelines when Leverkusen are playing games, and I don't know. I think there was definitely some positives and negatives to take away from this game. I thought the main positive was the way that Leverkusen, and they've been doing this now for quite a while now, and it's definitely kind of an element of how they've kind of clicked into gear in their Hillman, is the way that on the counter attack in these kind of really quick transitions, they just look superb. Both goals came about from Leverkusen really cutting Newcastle apart with their passing, particularly through the middle. Matza, Tillman, Garcia, Grimaldo was outstanding for that second one, but Tillman's weighted pass for the first, sorry, not the first goal, I'm thinking of the Patrick Schick non-penalty, but time and time again, I thought Leverkusen on the ball, on the break, were outstanding. But I thought Matt made a really good point in the subscriber chat that it was almost as if Newcastle or Leverkusen were willing to give up possession, perhaps so they could play this kind of counter-attacking football. And if you take a look at the way that Leverkusen have been playing in the Champions League this season, I can maybe kind of suggest a theory behind that, because if you look at their performances at home this season, i.e., front row fans in games are expected to maybe take the game to opposition, they've been actually quite poor. They drew 1-1 with PSV, and then they lost 7-2 to PSG, and then of course they drew 2-2 in this game. They've got one of the worst home records in the competition. It's evidently so. But if you look at their away record, they draw 2-2 with Copenhagen, beat Benfica 1-0, and beat Man City 2-0. And they've actually got the second best away record in the competition. Only Arsenal have picked up more points on the road so far. So I guess what we're talking about here is a team who like to play on the counter attack. We're maybe set up to play on the counter attack against Newcastle. And I guess, look, they took a point, they scored 2 goals. It's not a bad performance, but I don't know, Matt, I kind of felt like we could have maybe seen a bit more from from Leverkusen in this game, because I'm still not entirely convinced by this Newcastle side.
I think where you want to see more from Leverkusen, undoubtedly, is that final pass, that final shot, that final decision in the final third. That's what let them down, particularly in the first half. And as Poku got away, as he so often does a couple of times, but failed to really make that final pass. As we saw recently, the last game that I was here for against Dortmund, when he misses a chance there as well, which could potentially change the game. We have Jamal Kwanzaa getting forward as well, so a chance just before the end of the first half. This is probably well saved by Ramsdale, but he has so much space. He'd probably be getting a better shot away at that point. Mazza, a couple of good step overs to cut inside past Malik Chow at one point, but his shot was weak. So you keep seeing them getting into these situations where they've caused Newcastle problems, but they weren't able to finish it off. So one time where they were most impressive, that's what you were touching on, Stefan, was that really penetrative vertical move down the middle. Started off by Malik Tillman, and which ends in Patrick Schick being fouled. I thought at first glance in the box, last man, penalty red card. I think looking at the replays, the referee's got it right in the end. It was comfortably outside the box where the contact started, and I reckon Livramento is probably going to get a cross there at least. It's probably not the last man either. So yeah, that they could have made work a lot easier for themselves before we get to the big issue where they really shoot themselves in the foot in the second half. And unfortunately, he's making a habit of it, isn't it? How many times? It must be 2 or 3 occasions at least now that Mark Flecken has got himself into difficulties when holding on to the ball too long and coming under pressure. Then the last minute, today he was put under pressure by Nick Woltemade. It must be said, this was actually, in my opinion, I don't want to be harsh on Nick Woltemade, but his only notable contribution to the entire game. Putting some pressure on Mark Flecken for the penalty. And fair play, he's done the right thing. Flecken has lost his mind and I think tried to do some sort of Cruyff turn by the end. And when he then lunges in to challenge Woltemade for the ball, there's not a massive amount of contact. Woltemade is quite clever to get his left leg in front of Flecken a bit to invite the contact. Nevertheless, foul's a foul. It's a stupid situation that he's put himself in, and you can have no complaints. And Anthony Gordon equalises and sets up a real sort of power play, both from Gordon and from Newcastle in Lord Youngberg for the next 20-25 minutes, which obviously saw them take the lead as well. So Leverkusen, whether missing chances at one end or shooting themselves in the foot at the other end, didn't help themselves. In fact, it occurred to me in the first half as well, and actually just about a minute before the Flecken howler, that they were risking losing possession when playing the ball out themselves. And well, Leverkusen at time, like I thought, about a minute before the Flecken howler, I think it's Jamal Kwanzaa, who actually did really well at first in the right back position to dribble past the Newcastle player and then get himself in to play the ball out. But his pass is all wrong and immediately invites pressure from Newcastle. So yeah, it was an evening where they kept shooting themselves in the foot, Newcastle. So from that perspective, perhaps I thought it was fortunate with the points. But it didn't help themselves.
It's kind of funny that Flecken was brought in to stabilize the goalkeeping position. And I actually was a huge fan of that move because I thought, when he was around the first time in the Bundesliga for Freiburg, he was one of the best goalkeepers, not named Manuel Neuer during that time. And he's really struggling in this season, isn't he? To really make that step up from previously playing at Freiburg to Brentford and now playing for a Champions League club. It seems like maybe a step too far almost for him. We're looking back at Radetzky, and Radetzky was always good for a mistake as well, with the exception of that season where they won the Champions League. But yeah, this year is I don't know if he's really an upgrade at this point for this team, guys.
He is threatening to be a carbon copy of Hradecky, and that's my biggest concern. He's a good shot stopper, he's a decent goalkeeper, he's a safe pair of hands, but he seems to have this clangor in him from time to time, and the reason that Leverkusen won the Bundesliga, there's obviously a number of reasons. They had a world-class player in Florian Wirtz, they had tremendous players, had a great head coach, but one of the other reasons was that Herdecki managed to go a full season without really making any mistakes. And it was like, that was such a huge factor in Leverkusen being such a good team. And you're right, and as Matt alluded to, we're only, 25 games into the season, and we can already probably list on one hand how many kind of howlers Flecken has made. And you do kind of fear whether,
and they always come in the same situation too, don't they? I mean, some of the howlers that Herdecki would from time to time come out with, they weren't necessarily when he was in possession of the ball. There'd be other types of errors, but Flecken's errors are a carbon copy each time of hesitating on the ball in the box. Even little basic things like we saw tonight, where it sounds basic, but the ball is quite simply too far in front of him for him to be able to react. He's inviting the pressure from ball tonight. And like I said, then that apparent last minute decision to then try and do a turn and rescue the situation. By that point,
I mean,
so,
I think in that point, Matt, you're absolutely right. But I think it's maybe if you think back to I'm struggling to remember that the Freiburg team that Flecken was in, but I wouldn't say they were exactly Pep Guardiola's Barcelona and the Brentford sides he played for in the Premier League. I mean, Brentford are a very smart club, they're very well run, but they're not known for ticky-taka football. They're used to being very pragmatic. They set up defensively if they have to. They don't really expect their goalkeepers to be kind of playing like a kind of Manuel Neuer role. So, I can understand if Flecken has kind of stepped into his Leverkusen team and been asked to do a lot more on the ball than he has been asked to for most of his career. So,
particularly playing behind the front three as well, at back three, you'd be expected to play.
So we'll have to wait and see whether he can kind of rise to that occasion, or whether he'll just continue to struggle and then Leverkusen might have to make a change in that regard, or they'll just accept it from time to time he makes these mistakes. But it definitely probably cost him 2 points tonight, because I think had he not made that mistake, I don't really see. I mean, don't get me wrong, Newcastle did have other chances to score more goals, but as Matt said, I think the game kind of hinged on that. Maybe hinged on the Patrick Schick decision, Patrick Schick decision, as to whether that was a penalty or not. I think we're all agreed it probably wasn't.
I don't think that was a Schick decision.
Yeah, a Schick decision from the referee. I'm threatening to kind of fall into a sort of Sean Connery-esque impression there, so maybe it's a good time to move on.
Well, they do get the point, right? And we were talking about the implications of that a little bit before the pod and what that all means. I mean, ultimately, a point against Newcastle is probably not the end of the world. It puts them firmly in that top 24 group. Although 9 points, you probably want to have a few more. Leverkusen have to win the last 2 games, or get something out of the last 2 games to ultimately advance. And I think that is probably the major takeaway from this game here.
Can you clarify? Is it Olympiacos away, Villarreal at home?
It is, and it's two teams that have been pretty close on this competition, particularly Villarreal. But I kind of worry for Leverkusen in the sense that they have kind of managed to turn it on in the bigger games. I mean, obviously excluding that PSG result, but they did well against Benfica, did well against Manchester City, did very well against Manchester City, and they held their own against Newcastle here, and probably could have went on and won that game if, as we said, they hadn't made a mistake. So, but then there's the kind of games where they have had a few wobbles against the so-called smaller teams in the tournament. So they're in the position to get to the next round, but I think they're probably going to have to pick up 6 points from those 2 games if they want to ensure that they stay where they are in the group